Lastly, you say if the public is going to pay for an institution, then that institution should be accountable to the public. Well, the public pays for every institution. But I guess this is where definitions come in once again. By the public, I guess you mean the state. When I think of the public, I think of people. But I guess you mean the state. But the public pays for every institution. If they don't fund it, guess what? The institution ceases to exist. And this notion of accountability seems to be a different notion that you have of the word than the way I think of accountability. See, I think accountability is when there's reward for good behavior and punishment for bad behavior, where your outcome is determined by your performance. You're accountable. If you do a good job, you're rewarded. You do a bad job, you're demoted. You seem to mean that accountable simply means that the public has a say over it or has control of it. See, in my mind, private schools have the ultimate accountability. And why should a school be accountable to the public? Why should a school be accountable to a person that's not using their services? The school should be accountable to the students and to the parents of the students. If I'm paying to put my little Johnny in here, well, whose business is it? These private institutions, your argument is more the reason to privatize education. Well, you're saying, well, more people than just little Johnny's parents contributed and put in on that school, on that money that's sending him to that school. Well, I agree. Then let Johnny's little parents have their money back. Don't force us to put our money into a pot that pays to educate children that are not our own. Don't force us to do that, and you'll eliminate your own quandary. That'll solve that. But private institutions are much more accountable because they're not granted an existence by law. I like the old-fashioned version of accountability where, you know what? If your parents or your customers don't like what you're doing, they just don't send their children there. They just don't buy your product. And you go out of business. You fail. But there are thousands of public institutions, schools in particular, that are quote-unquote accountable to the public that can do the poorest job, and they never cease to exist. They're guaranteed an existence. How is that an accountability? Where is the accountability? When you say somebody's accountable in a private sector, if I make a mistake that costs my company $50,000 and I'm held accountable, what does that mean? That means I'm either forced back to pay my $50,000 or I'm out of there. Held accountable, these institutions that are nothing more than breeding grounds for gangs and violence that they call schools, they continue to exist. if that parent were able to pull that child out of there and take their money with them, the school would go under in a heartbeat. But they're guaranteed revenue through the public school system of taxation of property that then goes to support the public schools in that area. So, to summarize my response to your comment, we need a better definition of a couple things. We need a better definition of choice. Choice is not voting yes or no. Choice is having your selection among many different options and everybody getting the selection that they want. We need to have a good definition of accountability, where accountability means that institutions that don't do a good job can fail, and we don't have that concept in public education for the very most part. Very, very few poor performing public schools are ever closed or are ever under threat of having their children taken out of their classes. We need to think about what accountability and choice mean in the real world and not have a separate definition of choice and accountability just because it comes to education. All the more, education being as important as it is, they need to be more accountable, truly accountable, and we need to have more choice, true choice. The DC school voucher program is imperfect, and we can, I could go into another video about the imperfections in that program. But your logic to my particular comment, it just falls short to me. It falls woefully short.